I'll talk into the microphone. Well, it is 1:46, so why don't we go ahead and get the meeting started? And we are talking about density bonus program overview and workforce housing concepts. That's an exit, not an entrance. All righty.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Commissioners, Vice Mayor. I'm Whitney Carroll, the Planning, Zoning, and Building Executive Director. With me here today, I have Twee Shutt, the Planning Director, and Maria Bello, and Michael Howe with the Planning Division. We also have Sherry Howard with HED, and we have Matt Coda here with us. He's the county's workforce housing economic consultant. And of course, Patrick Rudder, Deputy County Administrator, and Darren Weiser. We're here to do a review of the density bonus and workforce housing programs with you all based on previous board direction. The board in early 2023 directed staff to review the workforce housing program, meet with industry, and come back with suggestions and updates. We met with industry and came back with what we referred to as phase one, and that included some housekeeping items and a more detailed, comprehensive method for monitoring compliance with the program. The board approved these provisions, and it has increased our ability to more accurately track compliance. In addition, earlier this year, we were asked for more information on how the density bonus program worked and the board's ability to approve additional units. We hope to cover most of this information here in this workshop today, as well as potential changes to the workforce housing program for your consideration. The presentation will include an overview of the Palm Beach County Density Bonus Programs, which includes Transfer of Development Rights, TDRs, Westgate Density Bonus Pool, the Urban Redevelopment Area, and Workforce Housing Program, to include a discussion on economic outcomes. Also, potential changes for your consideration, and impact fee assistance eligibility. And with that, I'll turn it over to Maria Bello. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon. We're going to begin with the Transfer of Development Rights Program. This is the oldest of our density bonus programs. It was established in the Comprehensive Plan in 1980. Whoops, here we go. Pardon me. Too far, there we go.
You get it back up.
So sorry. This is not, nope. Yes, that'd be great. Thank you.
Good. Okay, there you go.
Okay.
Now, there you go.
There we go. It's the oldest of our density bonus programs, adopted in the Comprehensive Plan in 1980, and actually one of the first transfer of development rights, or TDR, programs in the country. When it was established here, the intent was for to redistribute population from areas that would be more difficult to provide services to areas where services already existed or were planned to occur. The density bonus TDR aspect was initially set up as a voluntary program where private property owners could sell development rights to each other for use in projects. The Ag Reserve, what was then known as the reserve area, and lands designated as conservation was where transferred development rights could be moved off, and they could be used in planned unit developments in the urban area of the county. But zoning requirements had to be met, performance standards had to be met, facilities had to be available for those developments, and compatibility of the surrounding area needed to be addressed as well. So as I said, the program started in 1980. By the early 90s, only one transfer of development rights had occurred. And so the Board of County Commissioners at that time, in response to that poor usage of the program, did several things. They created a TDR task force. They directed staff to conduct a TDR study to see what recommendations could be arrived at to improve the use of the program. So over the next decade, several of the recommendations that came out of those efforts were implemented. For example, Policy 24B, which you see in every staff report for comprehensive plan amendments that are increasing density in the urban area of the county. That policy that was established as a result of these recommendations required TDRs as the mandatory method of increasing density. So that was a major outcome of those efforts. In addition, more specificity was added to the program in terms of what could be a sending and a receiving area and what could be the sending and receiving rates from one area to another. And then, perhaps most significantly, a recommendation was implemented to create a county TDR bank. This bank would be a means for developers to directly buy development rights from the county. The bank was created in 1998 and was stocked with the development rights from the environmentally sensitive lands that the county was purchasing at that time. The bank, just as an aside, started out with about 9,300 units. About 3,600 of those development rights have been sold. That has resulted in about $20 million for the county, and those funds are used for the maintenance of environmentally sensitive lands. Fast forward about a decade after that TDR bank was established in 2008. In 2007, the county linked workforce housing and TDRs. The county had just adopted the TDR program in 2006, and the next year in 2007 decided to require a percentage of any TDRs used to be provided as workforce housing. And then coming forward to today, TDRs are used in large developments. They're also used now fairly regularly in small projects or even individual landowners looking to add a unit or two. As you know, you see in your staff reports that Policy 24B. So you get, as a result of that policy, you get in every staff report a recommendation from staff that full use of TDRs be required of applicants that are seeking to increase density in the urban tier. And the board the board approves the use of TDRs anytime that they are being sent to a planned unit development or anytime when the use of the TDRs is going to exceed 2 TDRs per acre. Just to give you an idea of the sending and the receiving areas, the areas shown in the light and the dark green, or the conservation and natural areas, are where the TDRs would be sent from, as well as the agricultural reserve area. And they could be used, those privately transferred development rights or development rights purchased from the county bank could be used in the urban area, essentially the pale orange and the pale yellow area. In terms of the pricing of TDRs, the county does not set prices, obviously, for the private transfers, but does set prices for TDRs to be purchased from the county TDR bank, and those prices range from a high of $57,500 for a TDR that's going to deliver a market rate unit and a market rate single-family unit in a market rate development, to a low of $78 for a TDR that would be used to develop an affordable housing unit in a redevelopment area. So a wide range of prices for the TDRs. Our next density bonus program is the Westgate CRA Density Pool. The Westgate CRA overlay was part of the adoption of the 1989 plan that was reflecting the fact that the Westgate CRA had just recently been established. The purpose was to encourage redevelopment in this area, and that would be done through a series of different tools, including a density bonus pool. That density bonus pool is intended to result in quality housing stock in the area with a mix of incomes, a mix of rentals, and for sale units. And the density bonus pool allows a developer to add units on top of the land use designation of the site, anywhere up to 20 to 150 units per acre in addition to the land use of the site. There are requirements that come along with this: design, open space requirements, and of course, workforce housing requirements. A minimum of 20% of the units in the project need to be provided as workforce or affordable housing units. The use of the Westgate Density Bonus Pool requires a positive recommendation from the Westgate CRA Board, and also requires this board's approval if the density bonus exceeds 22 units per acre. Our third density bonus program is the urban redevelopment area. You're familiar with this in the central part of the county. It was established in the comprehensive plan in 2007. The intent of the program is to focus redevelopment and infill efforts in this area of the county, and it identifies several priority redevelopment areas where special land use designations apply. Those land use designations do not have a density limit per se. So this isn't technically a density bonus program, but it is a path to have significant density available in certain areas, in those priority redevelopment areas. Instead of having a cap associated with these land use designations, it's the form and some performance factors that determine the amount of units that will be available in these areas. They do come with requirements, among those a 15% workforce housing requirement. And the URA also offers a streamlined approval process wherein there can be administrative approval for residential projects that meet the requirements that the board has set. And with that, we come to our fourth density bonus program, which is within the workforce housing program of the county, and Michael Howe is going to review this one with you.
We're going to provide a brief overview of the workforce housing program as one of the density bonus options available in the county. Then
Can you pull your microphone towards you a bit?
Mike, there you go. Pull it.
Pull it towards you so we can hear you.
Excuse me. Then we're going to go into more detail on some aspects of the program and discuss some areas where the board may want to consider program changes to better align the program with county objectives and changing market conditions. The workforce housing program was adopted as a mandatory program in 2006, replacing the voluntary density bonus program that was in effect for several years with very limited success. As was previously stated in 2007, the board required a percentage of TDRs as workforce. In 2010, due to economic conditions, the WHP required percentages and the WHP affordability periods were reduced. In August of 2019, as a result of changes intended to encourage the development of single-family on-site for-sale units, the program streamlined density bonus up to 50%, but maintained the conditional Class A approval for density bonus greater than 50%. Also, for the first time since 2006, the in-lieu fees were increased and the exchange option was established. In 2023, there was changes that focused to improve compliance monitoring and address fees that could be charged to rental tenants. The program is an inclusionary program, meaning that every project in the unincorporated urban suburban tier of 10 or more units has a mandatory workforce obligation. In addition, the program has a voluntary component where interested developers can obtain a density bonus in exchange for an additional larger component of workforce housing. The workforce housing obligation can be met by providing the WHP units on-site, off-site, pay an in-lieu fee, purchase or restrict existing units, donate developable land, or utilize the exchange program. The restriction for for-sale units is a 15-year recurring restriction. For rentals, it's just a 30-year restriction. Now, the recurring for sale means that should a workforce unit be sold in a 15-year period, it must be sold to an income-qualified household, and a new 15-year period will begin. The target workforce housing incomes are based on the annual AMI per HUD, which in 2023 was 98,300. The definition for workforce housing is 60% of the AMI through 140. And through our program, we've established 4 income categories: 60 to 80, greater than 80 to 100%, greater than 100% to 120%, and greater than 120 to 140% rentals only.
Nothing?
Well, can you go back one, please?
Tier?
The program applies in the unincorporated urban suburban tier, which is the white areas within the red boundaries. The board also has placed conditions of approval to provide workforce housing on amendments in areas outside of the US tier. Within the workforce housing program, developers have 2 options: a full incentive option and a limited incentive option. The full incentive allows up to a 100% density bonus based on a point system, and the units are provided in all income categories. This is typically selected by developers of multifamily rental projects that are seeking to maximize their density. The limited incentive option caps the density bonus at 50%, but requires any workforce units that are provided to be in the lowest 2 income categories. This is typically selected by developers of low-density, for-sale, single-family projects that aren't looking for a lot of extra density and want to minimize the obligation. The obligation is about half of what it would be under the full incentive. Here's a couple of typical examples. 2 similar properties, 10 acres each, one designated for low density at the low residential 2 unit per acre, and the other for higher density at high residential 8 units per acre. Low-density projects are typically for sale and typically select the limited incentive option. The option has a max density bonus of 50%, but half the obligation of the full incentive route. Higher density projects are usually seeking to maximize the density and will typically use the full incentive option, which allows for a density bonus of up to 100%. The amount of bonus is based on a point system which reflects county objectives, such as delivering on-site for-sale units in areas with low concentrations of workforce housing. Density bonuses greater than 50% require BCC approval. In this example, the low-density project can achieve 30 total units with a 2-unit obligation. The obligation can be met through any of the disposition options, but if provided as units, they must be restricted to the 2 lowest income categories. For this type of project, the WHP units are not typically provided on site. More often, the developer will select the in lieu option, the exchange option, or provide the units offsite at another location. The full incentive example is typical of what is requested at the higher densities. This property at HR8 could start with 80 units, but through the workforce housing density bonus, could potentially double that density to 160. At 160 units, the workforce obligation would be 33 units. Note that these examples do not include the use of TDRs. For any additional density added through TDRs, the workforce obligation would be 34%, and would be added to the obligation shown above. These examples also do not reflect any FLU amendments. When a future land use element amendment is involved, staff will recommend that the units be provided on site. For a single-family project, 10% of the units. For a townhouse project, 20% of the units. For an apartment project, 25% of the units. As mentioned earlier, the 2019 update of the program incorporated some new provisions to try to incentivize the delivery of the workforce units as on-site for-sale units. Under the full incentive option, the obligation is reduced by 12.5% for workforce units provided as on-site for sale units. Further reduction if single-family units, a reduction of 20%, and if townhomes, a reduction of 10%. In any case, on all options, there's a 1.5 times multiplier applied if a for-sale project meets its workforce obligation with off-site rentals. As part of the 2019 update of the program, the new disposition option was incorporated, the exchange program. This option was proposed by industry and accepted by the board and allows one developer to essentially pay another to take on their workforce obligation. The market rate developer pays the workforce developer a fee based on 80% of the in lieu fee, and the workforce developer then has 3 years to deliver the workforce units. The market rate development gets to move forward with their project. The county receives surety in the amount of the in lieu fee in case the units are not delivered for some reason. To date, through the exchange program, the workforce units have been sent to projects in Lake Worth Beach and West Palm Beach. 42 units have been delivered. Just over 100 more are in process, and there are additional 2 projects proposing to use the exchange program. The 2023 income ranges are shown on the slide, give you an idea that the households served by workforce housing. These ranges are based on percentages applied to the annual area median income figure as published by HUD, and the annual median income was $98,300 for 2023. The definition for workforce housing is a low of 60%, which means a household income of $58,980, to as high as 140% of AMI, which is $137,620. The 2024 figures will be released in a couple weeks and will be higher since the area median income has risen 5.8% over the past year. It's got to be me. The 2023 rental prices are shown on this slide. The rent prices are permitted by workforce housing for these income ranges. The numbers themselves, the rental numbers, are based on the Florida Housing Finance Corporation Multifamily Rental Program annual rent schedule. So the lowest rent would be a studio at 60%, would be $1,023, and the highest rent is a 4-bedroom at 140% at $3,955. The for sale prices are based on the annual AMI, again, published by HUD. The 3 prices that are shown are the highest in that category that a unit can be sold for. So a low-income unit at $206,430, a moderate 1 unit, $265,410, the moderate 2 unit at $324,390. One of the changes in 2019 was to eliminate the highest category in the for sale portion of the workforce program. The units have been provided through the program. So far to date, 104 projects have been subject to workforce housing. This has created an obligation of more than 3,300 workforce housing program units. Of these, 1,456 rentals have been built and 250 for sale units. About 1,270 additional units are in the pipeline, primarily rental units. And 326 units, or about 10% of the obligation, have been addressed through payment of in lieu fees. These funds, by the way, are used for the down payment assistance for purchasers of the workforce housing program units. $7.1 million have been spent to date on down payment assistance for 228 homes. That's the end of my presentation.
So as we hand the baton over to Matt with BAE Urban Economics, let me give you just a little bit of context on what Matt does and the function he performs. When we wrote the initial workforce housing program in 2006, we actually engaged a professor from Rutgers, Dr. James Burchell, I believe it was, Robert Burchell, thank you, to run model pro formas. And we did this to analyze what a large lot single family, a small lot single family, a multifamily, and a townhouse. Kind of take those broad concepts, apply and create a development out of them, and what is their profitability? What does it look like? We somewhat artificially held ourselves to a 10% rate of return at that time on for sale product, and then a capitalization rate for rental product of about 5.5%. Those aren't strict ceilings or floors, but we really tried to keep in that area. Matt, in his work in the past 10 years, has done that as well. So we did this initially in 2006, and it was of great value as we worked through the initial program and worked with industry, and that's always the default point. I can't build a project, it's making it unprofitable anymore. And we said, then show us where we're wrong, show us what we're doing. Back then, and as Matt has done in the past, we not only look at our stuff, we talk to industry people. We get a feel on the ground from the ones who are building, from what the land costs are, and apply nationwide trends as well. So we do our best to give an accurate feeling. It is not any given project that you might see on a Thursday. Don't get me wrong, we're not taking those. But using the models, using generalized formula and generalized sites being developed, we put that together. So what Matt has done, we engaged Matt. So first, initially wrote the program in 2006. You might recognize the era as just before the Great Recession kicked in. We came back in 2010 and amended the program, quite frankly, relaxed a number of the standards. Didn't feel the need to do financial analysis when we were going backwards. We then re-engaged in 15 and 16 and began working with Matt and his staff. As Michael pointed out, the board in 2019 subsequently made changes and made a number of changes along the way. Matt did that work, and I'm stealing a little bit of his thunder, but I just wanted to point out one piece. As he was doing that work, we had legislation dropped on us. I think it was either the first reading or right before adoption, where we have a statute in place that says if you have a workforce housing and inclusionary program, you have to fully offset the costs with the benefits. So I think we were like a month before adoption, and we ran that number and continue to do it to date. So I'll stop there on that point, but I wanted to give one other thing. We've had questions periodically. Someone who owns a for sale product, and no argument there. The sales prices and the resale prices are restricted. We establish them. You do not capture all of the equity that builds. If you're in that house for 10 years, you're not recapturing that. That's not the way our program is set up. That has led to questions and prompting at times about we're not allowing the great American dream to exist, and you can't fully access the equity in a home. And to that, we'd say two things. One, you take it off the books, you literally need to recreate 2 units. You've lost one, and then you got to go recreate another one just to get back to zero. So we asked Matt to kind of take a look at what your financial position would look like, renting versus owning a workforce versus owning a market rate, and just kind of aggregate those pieces. So I'm going to stop there and let Matt take it over and walk you through that information.
Perfect. Thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon, Madam Vice Mayor, members of the Commission. It's a pleasure to be back. As Patrick explained, we have supported the calibration of the workforce housing program over the years by doing this financial feasibility analysis from the perspective of developers that would be trying to run the numbers to figure out if the projects are feasible to comply with the various workforce housing requirements and also achieve those targeted rates of return to be able to be attractive to lenders, investors, their own business profitability, and so forth. So we're applying those kinds of industry standards to our analysis and understanding from the perspective of a developer or an investor or financer, whether these projects work with compliance with these requirements. So on this slide that you see up on the screen, some of the typical prototype projects that we looked at, a couple of the low-density single-family residential, a townhome project, a multifamily higher-density type project. And as Patrick mentioned, we're applying that standard of profitability to understand if these projects are feasible. So in late 2019, the analysis that we did identified that within each of those prototype project types, there were financially feasible options that met those standards of return for each of them. And it doesn't mean that every option for compliance was feasible, but there were at least some options that would be feasible. So a developer had choices to make as to what would be suitably profitable within those different project types. Then again, so just acknowledging that inclusionary housing programs by their nature are what we consider ride-along programs. So if you don't have financially feasible market rate developments, you don't get the inclusionary workforce projects, or you don't get the projects that are paying the in lieu fees. So we want to make sure we meet those standards. Then along came SB 1730 in late 2019. As Patrick mentioned, we did conduct the analysis to understand compliance with that new requirement of state law. So on the screen here, you see the Florida state statute that essentially says that counties are allowed to have inclusionary housing requirements. Counties are allowed to have housing linkage fee requirements on the condition that the incentives granted to those projects fully offset the economic or financial impact of those requirements. So we did our analysis there, and essentially we're asked, do we fully offset the cost to project profitability for a project by offering the incentives versus whether there were no workforce housing requirements? And our analysis did find that the prototype projects are actually more profitable with the various incentives offered than in a no workforce housing requirement, no density bonus type of situation. So that was good news, of course, to find that. Just a summarization here on the slide. So you see the yellow highlighted rates of return on the table, and then you see below that the rates of return for the various compliance options, the on-site, the off-site, and the exchange. And you can see that by offering that additional density, more market rate units can be built in excess of the number of inclusionary units. You're helping to increase profitability of these projects. So in that sense, we'd say it's a win-win in terms of the developers are getting a boost, but you're getting those workforce units as a part of the project. Next, we'll go into this assessment of the financial benefits of the workforce housing program for home buyers in that program. So as Patrick mentioned, we wanted to look at the financial position of a workforce home buyer in comparison to a market rate home buyer over time, but also in comparison to what we consider kind of the default. Most likely, workforce buyers are coming out of a rental housing situation, so comparing to being a long-term renter versus being a long-term owner under a workforce housing program. So we're tracking the household expenditures over time on a long-term basis and on a cumulative basis, but also looking at annual outlay. And we'll get into those details in just a moment. Okay, so the comparison model incorporates a lot of the different criteria, standards, metrics, and so forth that Michael mentioned in terms of how much the unit can cost initially, the ability to sell at some point in time after 15 years and not have to repay the down payment assistance, be able to capture the full equity involved, all the other costs associated with home ownership, principal, interest, taxes, property insurance, so on and so forth. We have a complicated spreadsheet that backs all of this up, that factors all this in, projects it out over a 30-year period, and then we can look at how things work out over time. We do have to make some assumptions there about rates of increase, so things like the allowable workforce housing price increase over time, the market rate housing price increase over time, the increase in market rate rent that a household would be paying if they weren't in one of these workforce housing programs. Typically, we used the last 10 years average rate of increase on those, so we have a sort of comparable benchmark to go off of. So what we found with that analysis is that starting in year 16, once those covenants about selling the unit at restricted prices are gone, then the workforce home buyers are going to benefit even more than the market rate home buyers in those scenarios because of the reduced costs of owning the workforce unit over time because they paid a lower price initially, the homebuyer assistance forgiveness, and then the ability to sell that unit at a full market rate after 15 years. So there's some clear benefits for the long term for those workforce homebuyers, whether they're a low income category or a moderate income category. I'll show you some graphs here, and these just show that market rate home buyers' financial position increasing over time the longer they hold that unit and realize that unit appreciation. That's in the red. The blue line is the the moderate income home buyer in this case. And you can see that steep crossover point between year 15 and 16 when the ability to sell the unit at full market rate kicks in. So after 16 years, the financial benefit to that workforce home buyer is greater. The thing to keep in mind with this graph is that this is the net position compared to renting. So in all these cases, they're better off than renting in any of those years, even before that ability to sell at full market rate kicks in at 2016. Let's see. So that's low income. Moderate income is a very similar shaped graph there. Again, the crossover point at year 16, and the greater benefits thereafter. The other way to look at this, the benefit to households from participating in the workforce housing program is to look at what that annual outlay is on housing costs. What's the homeowner's budget look like for housing if they're participating in the program? And so what we see there is that in terms of that annual outlay, the moderate income workforce buyer is going to be having less of an annual outlay for their housing costs starting in year 16 and every year after compared to renting. For a lower income home buyer, workforce housing home buyer, that benefit is going to come sooner. So we'll see here in the graphs, just to illustrate that, again, the red is the market rate home buyer, the gray is the renter, and the blue is the workforce home buyer. And you can see for the low income workforce home buyer after year 2, beginning in year 2 rather, and that's after they've made their initial down payment and those sort of initial big upfront expenditures they make, they're actually having a lower annual outlay than even the renter, and then of course lower than the market rate home buyer. And then for the moderate income home buyer, you can see that they're having a little bit of a delay until year 6 when they're actually doing better than the renters, but again, benefiting quite a bit on an annual outlay basis compared to the market rate home buyer. So I think with that, I turn back to Maria and Patrick.
Okay, so this next section is a discussion of several things that have been identified in the course of implementing the workforce housing program.
Ms. Bello, would you hold on a second? Commissioner Baxter, do you have a question?
Yes, and if you don't mind, before we move on to the next section.
That's fine.
Thank you. Quick question. So we're comparing a lot of the numbers, the financials, programs, so on. And the last time we came together, I specifically wanted to have, some bankers, some people in the financial institute industries to come and give us present their own numbers and how it compares to our programs and if they work well together. Is this something we're getting at or getting to?
I think where we'd be, Commissioners, is want to hear from you, get your direction as we move forward with any changes. We would be engaging them, bringing that forward, hearing what they have to say, as well as addressing the direction we had gotten from you.
Well, I believe my direction was to have it addressed at this workshop because we knew it was coming up. Have we reached out to anyone?
We have not had any independent discussions with bankers or financiers recently. We've done that every time that we do make the changes.
Okay, so I guess, I feel like we're handicapped then? Because if we're going to direct how this program should work, shouldn't we also understand how that works with
the financial institutions?
And I think that's what the part we do from a financial institution perspective, whether it's a home sale or a rental, because we've done both. We've sold over 300 homes and we've built, I don't know, well, the market has built, I don't know how many thousands of units. So it's worked in the commercial lending world. I think to your point, what you're looking for is the input from lenders and the input from the developers, what this program means to them and how it works for them. We have one that's in place right now. What we have done historically is your direction to make any changes, or none for that matter. We would be engaging industry at that point. Here's where we're looking to go.
I guess I just kind of feel that's backwards. Like, why are we, I guess we can set where we want it to go, but if we're going to make an informed or an educated decision, shouldn't the financial analysis, because we can have all the hope streams in the world, but if it's not possible or feasible for a developer or builder to actually bring to light.
Couldn't agree with you more, which is why we would never and have never brought a code change recommendation that did not meet the affordability parameters that we set, we were sharing with you. Back to where you're looking to go. I think what you really want to hear, and the board would want to hear, is what does industry think about the changes? You've got a program in place now, so they're operating with this. They live with this right now. We've had one for 18 years. We're talking about the potential changes. We would want to share that with them, what you might be directing us to consider. It wouldn't be go write the code words, but look at these ideas. We can then work with industry on those, analyze it, and bring it all back to you.
Again, I hear you. And I'm going to stop because I feel like we're talking in circles at this point. But again, to make an informed decision, we need to have all the information and to see which direction. But it was specifically direction. So that's what I'm kind of confused about, why we're having these conversations and they're not here.
And I guess the challenge would be I couldn't share with industry what changes we're looking to make. They would say, are we changing the percentages? Are we raising them? Things. It's a little bit of a catch-22. I hear your point. And that's absolutely the intent to bring that when we have something to share with them.
All right, thank you.
Administrator Baker.
The program that staff is laying out in front of you, we received major input from industry, banking, et cetera, and brought that back to the board. The board approved the program that we're laying out in front of you. And I guess I should take the blame. We didn't have anything new to share with industry until after we came to the board to lay out how the program works today. We brought our third party in because he's the one that also works with us as well as industry to get input from them to lay out whatever is going to be laid out. He did that as a part of this existing program, along with input from industry on this existing program. And so we're here to kind of lay it out. You give us direction, leave it alone, it works, don't do anything. Or go talk to industry, we see where we can make the changes. We'll go have subsequent meetings with industry because it'll take more than one. And then we will workshop it back with the board. And at that time, industry normally shows up to share with the board what their thoughts and opinions are. And we will definitely involve the bankers on this issue as well.
We had a workshop or a presentation on this, was it last week or the week before? Very recently, which is,
HEDs.
HED's bond.
right,
HEDs, right, correct.
which is what prompted this, and we knew this workshop was coming. So if we can't, I guess, do a direction or follow through with something, I would be greatly appreciated if I could know that day, so I'm not expecting the information when we get here. I would just really be appreciated if we could do that going forward, instead of just feeling like it wasn't heard. And then lastly, we'll see kind of where this goes, but I mean, that was a huge factor. We learned a lot of things that we didn't know, and things that were vouchers were brought up, and several other factors were kind of brought up during a meeting that I was unaware of previous. So again, having all the information helps a lot.
Commissioner Bernard?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I know for me what I would suggest is I see that some of the possible changes that you would like for us to discuss, for me it's very hard for us to have these discussions right now when I'd love for you to, meet with industry and the bankers, the Gold Coast builders. I think they were here in 2019 when we brought this up, and then to go over each one of these items, and then we're able to really weigh in a little bit more, because we don't want to, I know for me, I don't want to go in a direction without really having the industry weighing in on that. So that's my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Woodward.
I have a number of questions, but I wanted to see, there's only, I think, 2 slides left, or would it be better to finish this? Or, I have
Why don't we go ahead and
about
finish?
10 questions to go, so can we finish?
Because it's not that much, so why don't we go ahead and
Yeah,
finish?
thank you.
All right. So you have at your places this table, which is a large print version of the same information that was provided on 2 slides in the presentation you have at your places, and the same information that's on these next 2 slides. And what this is a collection of thoughts, essentially, concepts that have arisen in discussion over the last several years of implementing the program to address particular issues that have come up. Some actually work at odds with others, so you wouldn't necessarily direct all of these things. You might go in one direction on one topic or a different direction in another. So this is just to bring these to your attention to see if the board has any concepts in particular that they maybe feel would be worth looking into further or dismiss altogether. So beginning with the applicability of the workforce housing program. As was mentioned earlier, it applies today only in the urban-suburban tier. So one concept is extend that so that the board doesn't have to do those projects outside the urban-suburban tier by condition of approval. In terms of voluntary participation, we regularly get requests from small developers that would like to participate in the workforce housing program and use the density bonus that comes with it, but they don't get to that 10-unit threshold, so they're not eligible to use it. That might be an easy way to facilitate their development and also gain a couple of extra workforce units. So that's that concept. The affordability periods. As you heard, it's 15 years recurring for sale, 30 years for rental projects. There's been discussion about potentially changing that. Affordability periods actually used to be longer in the earlier version of the program years ago. So that's a possibility there. Workforce housing income eligibility determination. So this is for rental projects. In the rental communities, our property managers are not required to recertify the tenants every year. So we have situations where an individual may be eligible when they move in, but may stay there for several years. And their income may go up. Their income may actually push them out of the workforce housing program. So one possibility is to require income certification every year. This was not done that way initially because that was a concession, I think, to property managers at the time because it was going to be too burdensome. They are not prohibited from doing it, but they are not required to do it. So that might be an opportunity to free up some workforce housing units in our projects. And then moving to the disposition options available to developers. In lieu fees, this board has discussed the possibility of doing away with in lieu fees or basing the in lieu fee on a different structure that might generate more income for these programs and potentially serve as a disincentive for paying the in lieu fee and deliver a unit instead. The limited incentive option. As you heard earlier, the limited incentive option is used primarily by low-density projects that are not looking for large density bonuses, but their obligation is half of what it would be. So we think it may make sense to have an obligation that is the same for all, the base obligation that is the same for all projects, and then, maintain a higher percentage for just a density bonus component. Exchange options. We have the exchange program, which has been fairly successful since 2019. It, though, includes 2 options. One of those options is for developers that are ready to go. They have an exchange partner in mind. The other option is for developers that think they'd like to use it but don't have a developer in mind to deliver the exchange units. The problem that we have learned is that exchanges can be fairly complicated, and so we think this is something where the exchange should be fully baked before that becomes the disposition option. So we would suggest doing away with that option that lets them try to find a partner mid-process of the development. Default disposition of workforce housing. This board has sometimes expressed interest in seeing more units delivered on site. That could be the default option, and then seek a waiver. The developer would need to seek a waiver from the board if they wanted to opt for a different option. That's one possibility. On-site for sale workforce housing units. The reason we have a 1.5 multiplier in place today that was proposed by industry back in 2019 is because there was concern that the county might instead institute a like-for-like requirement, where a single-family market rate project would be required to deliver their workforce units as single-family market rate units. So industry offered that 1.5 exchange as an alternative, and the board at the time accepted it. But if there is interest in seeing more for sale single-family units, then the like-for-like is something that the board could consider. Separate pricing for multifamily and townhome and single-family categories of units. Right now, we have a single price within each of the income categories. What that means is we're getting primarily townhomes and some condos, very few, again, in the single family because of the price. If we were able to have a price that was somewhat higher for single family and perhaps somewhat lower for multifamily, so there would be a range, there might be the opportunity to incentivize units to be delivered of the different unit types. And the price schedules in general for rent and for sale. We hear very often that the workforce housing program, the lowest income is too high. We have lots of people that don't qualify. So if that's something the board wanted to entertain, we could be looking at adding a lower component of maybe a 40 to 60, or shifting the obligation down toward the lower end, this more of this in the 60 to 80 range, any number of things that could be done. And then on our rental side, the middle income rents are very high, close to market rate. That may be a category that doesn't need to exist in a workforce housing program. And then in terms of the development process, there's been discussion, obviously, about the cost of development and obstacles to development. There's been suggestions to use the in lieu fees toward development costs, or to assist developers with development costs. There are also other ways. There may be flexible land development regulations, some flexibility that could be afforded there. And also in terms of the county-owned sites, it may be that the county, makes more of those available for the purposes of, again, reducing land costs. And then also related to land development regulations, parking requirements. I know this board is going to discuss parking requirements in the near future, but that seems to be a recurring theme with developers of multifamily projects, that the parking requirements are too high. And then the last item is this impact fee assistance program that Housing and Economic Development would like to discuss with you.
Thanks, Maria. Good afternoon, Sherry Howard from the Department of Housing and Economic Development. And as long as we were on the topic of housing, although this isn't workforce housing, this is the county's Affordable Housing Impact Fee Assistance Program. So the Impact Fee Assistance Program takes interest earned from roads, parks, and public building impact fees and puts them towards affordable, or makes them available for affordable housing. And that interest earned is 50% of the interest earned that goes towards this program annually. It is administered by the Department of Housing and Economic Development, and we provide assistance for impact fees due to new residential construction for sale or multifamily. We offer it through a notice of funding availability annually, and the current NOFA offers $3.2 million. Let me see if I can get this thing to work. So right now, based on the guidelines that have been approved by the board, we allow this program, we allow applicants that provide up to 140% AMI incomes for residents. As long as we were having this conversation, and we had it during the housing bond issue, we wanted to talk about whether the board had a desire to move the maximum AMI for this program to 110% of the AMI, as they did for the housing bond, as instead of the 140%. And that's the last issue on the list.
Yeah, Vice Mayor, that concludes all we have. We're happy to take any questions and direction on HD's point and the list we have prepared for you as well.
Okay, since I just looked up and I see three lights, Commissioner Weiss, why don't you go first?
You want it, you can have it. Well, thank you. So going back to the TDRs, they won't last forever, right?
There are still...
There's only a limited number of them.
There are about 5,700, but there is a policy in the plan that allows the board to create more development rights for the purposes of putting them in the county bank. And we, as I mentioned, we've only had the one transferred to private one, so there is a potential for additional, maybe there may have been a second one much later, but the potential for additional private transfers in the future.
I mean, my question really is related to it, and I guess it's in one way it's like printing money, but it's just adding costs too, right? It's just adding costs to the units.
When the TDRs are purchased for the purpose of delivering a workforce or an affordable unit, they are very inexpensive.
But they're not zero.
They're not zero. They're not zero.
Or they're not negative. So it does add to the cost of producing every unit in the county. We talk about how expensive housing is here, and we've made it. I mean, and I understand why we did it, but maybe it's time to think about it and say, is it accomplishing what we want? Which is hence my question about was it going to run out? Because what's the plan for funding the environmental lands when the TDRs run out? Because that was the impact that I saw. I mean, because that's where the money is going now. But it's just adding cost to any housing. Well, any housing that's looking for any kind of density bonus, and we can extract other things like we do today, which is affordable or workforce housing is what we extract out of them, out of our developers.
If I may add one thing.
Sure.
Madam Vice Mayor, typically TDRs, when added to a project that's seeking high density, the alternative is a plan amendment. And the plan amendments are also very expensive for a developer. So to the extent that TDRs can replace plan amendments as was originally intended, they may actually represent a cost savings.
Okay. On the for sale, on the comparison of the financial positions, and that's on page 15, and that's your slide number, I think, 30. So it looks like on average, the down payment assistance is about $57,000. That's, I mean, I took the numbers you...
That is about average. It's about 55,000.
Well, it was the 18.8 million divided by whatever the number of units, 326 units, so it's 57,000. So in looking at that and comparing it, in your comparison, when you calculate that, because there's a value to that money, right, of being, and I did a quick calculation on it, that 57,000 after 15 years at 4% is about $102,000.
If you compounded it on an interest rate, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yep. So is that built in, when you look at these numbers, is that return, did you build the return in on that as well?
So the way it works is that down payment assistance or home buyer assistance brings down the cost of the mortgage. So they have a reduced amount that has to be financed through the mortgage. So they are benefiting from having a lower mortgage principal and interest payment during that time. So it makes it more affordable to own that unit than it would even if it was just at that restricted workforce sale price. It's actually buying that cost down.
Okay. And so when you, because you look at that, you got that sort of hockey stick line going there. So, okay. It just seems, and then you said there's if they run it out to the 15 years, then it becomes forgivable, but prior to that, it's repayable? Is that how it works?
It's recurring.
No, repayable, the down payment assistance.
The homebuyer assistance.
Yes,
Yes, without interest, as I understand it.
that's correct. Zero.
Okay, all right, fair enough. I like the idea, some of these other ideas I think are interesting and probably deserve a lot more discussion, that you gave us on that list, and something certainly I want to think about. We started, and the other day I was in the office, we were talking about everything that's getting built in the county, how many units, and there are literally thousands of them that have been built. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm looking back there at Jonathan. I mean, there were thousands when you look at all the programs. And so I'm looking forward to when you guys put out that information. But it's significant when you compare us to Broward. We actually look pretty good when you take the housing finance funding. But I think some of these other things to look at to change, probably reasonable time based on how we've been going and what we've seen happen and gotten built. So I appreciate the opportunity to review this today and look forward to further discussions on this.
Thank you. Commissioner Woodward.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I'll skip my TDR questions. I think you covered that pretty good. I did want to go to your slide 16. The typical examples with the workforce housing. And just so I understand, with this, even with the much higher increase in workforce housing units, they're still getting a considerable number of more market rate units. So even, with, and I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Matt.
Okay, thank you. When you took this into the consideration for how these would get built, because you were doing like the builders' feasibilities, when the information that you gave us as far as it's not cost prohibitive to them, how much less cost prohibitive is it when they use the exchange program? Because then those units are being replaced on site with market rate units, and then they're paying for off-site somewhere else, which gives them more market units. Is that a different formula that was on here?
So the exchange program's a little bit tricky because the county doesn't set the exchange price. That's more of a negotiation between the market rate builder and the workforce builder. So we don't know exactly what that transaction is going to look like. In our analysis, we made some assumptions about the cost, and that exchange cost per unit would actually have to be less than some of the other less complicated options that are out there for a developer to want to kind of engage in that process that's going to be a little bit more expensive transaction for them to manage.
Well, we only have 42 units actually built. Can you extrapolate from that information?
If they were willing to tell us what those negotiations were between those private parties.
Is that not something we can compel?
No.
All right, so moving forward with the exchange program, is that something that we can have a say in? Or at least have the information so we can make a good determination? We're making policy here. We should be able to understand what the exchange program costs them versus on-site.
There's a fixed price for what the exchange will be, and that was, again, Maria touched on, it came at the behest of industry, and it's been well received on both sides. The greater idea behind it is it keeps us out of the business. They just tell us that they're doing an exchange, and we're not a party to anything other than the sign-offs at the end. How much, the wheres, the whats, what they're making on the, I'll call it the parent site versus the exchange site, all the other pieces that might go along with it. We're not going to get that information. If the direction is to go back and take a look at some of these, we can include that in discussions with industry. If the board's interested in finding out more, I'd be happy to share that with them. But that's one of those pieces that
Well, I don't need the actual dollar amount of what it costs per unit, but are they building one-bedroom apartments for single-family homes somewhere else? Are they building three-bedroom apartments? What are we getting? What are these 42 units?
The 42 units are multifamily rental units delivered in the city of Lake Worth Beach with a range of sizes, but I believe all 1- and 2-bedroom units.
And what was that in exchange for?
In exchange for a single-family market rate project in the unincorporated Boca Raton area. Single-family units. So they, I believe, had an obligation of, what's 1.5, so it would have been, just under 30 units that were turned into 42 units in the rental project.
Because I do like the idea of the exchange program. It gives us more units. My concern is the 1.5 number. I'm not sure exactly where that came from. And if we're comparing, a West Boca home that's going to sell for a significant amount of money, I'm not saying they don't get to make money, but if we're getting 1- and 2-bedroom apartments in Lake Worth for an exchange, I would think that your formula is going to show them coming out very much ahead on this, and they'd be lining up to want to do the exchange program. Are we seeing that? And what was we have how many coming? It was 100 and something coming? I missed that number. 42 units existing and the 100.
Right, you have the numbers there. You're in that ballpark. There's a couple of projects that have already been approved, and then a couple more that are under consideration. I think one more under consideration.
Now, do we have to have these units online before they can close on the homes? The market rate homes?
They actually have to have the exchange partner lined up, and they have to have a restrictive covenant at both sites before they pull the first building permit at the market rate project. But the county gets surety, and then the market rate, the workforce developer then has 3 years to deliver the units. That hasn't taken 3 years on the projects that have delivered units yet, but.
But that's only one project right now, right? The 42 units?
Right, they actually fed from 2 different projects, but yes, yeah, and one developer, yeah.
Okay, I like the idea of that program. I'm just not sure we're really getting as much as we should out of it, especially if we can't put a price on it, but it seems like there could be somewhat of a formula. If we're getting 1-bedroom apartment units for a very large single-family home, that's not 1.5, I mean, we need to put number of bedrooms or have some sort of a formula that goes with this, that we need more units. And a 1.5 1-bedroom units compared to, what the density is. And if this is meant to be a density bonus, so they're getting market rate units out of it, and if they're not building them on site, they're getting extra market units on the property where they want in exchange for this other one. And also the timing, is that something that we can tighten up to where these units have to be online at the same time before they can start selling their market rate units?
That would be a policy decision.
You've got a hard stop too, don't you, on the market?
No.
I think with the exchange, the thing with the 3 years that came about was, we heard a lot from industry. they may have a project that's moving its way through to gaining their entitlements, wherever it may be in a different jurisdiction. And they needed 3 years from start to finish to be able to have that product built and ready to accept these and bring them out. They could move to working through what this board sees for approvals, but where they're creating the project with the exchange, we heard very strongly from industry, they needed 3 to have it out of the ground, leased, ready to go.
Well, we just had a number.
So we're going
of-
to go back and talk about.
How many projects did we just have here for bond money with, 1,400 units that were supposedly shovel-ready? I mean, it seems like there's opportunity for them to fund some units that are sitting out there ready to go. And if we were pooling these together, I mean, some of these projects might not even need bond money from us because we could pull together 150 units from different projects.
Do not disagree. The exchange program creates a revenue stream for a project that's largely unrestricted. We're just making sure the dance partners get together. What they're doing after that and bringing it about is their business. One thing that we've been curious to see, and while there have been projects that have utilized the exchange program, we're 4 going on 5 years into its existence, and it's been used, but it's not been as heavily used as you might think it would be. Now, I think some of that comes from a lot of what we've seen by way of approvals has been multifamily, so you're not going to go off-site to do a multifamily. This is largely there. It was a function of proposal and discussion with the board in 17, 18, and 19, that like for like that Maria touched on. If I'm building a single family, I'm creating a single family obligation. Same thing for townhouse, same thing for multifamily. So this was the middle ground that was recommended by industry. But we'll see where the world takes us.
If we take your first recommendation, extending it to the ex-urban, rural, and ag reserve tiers, how much would that conversation change? Because I don't think we're getting multifamily built in those areas.
You could do that, and we wanted to include that as something to consider because it's been out there for 20 years. And I would tell you, remind me, Michael, it was initially in, then we withdrew it, then it was initially out, we included it, then withdrew it. I'm going back to 2007, 2008 era. I would say that we have the concept largely covered. If there's a comp plan amendment that comes through, which is the only way they're increasing density in these tiers, but for the ag reserve, if you're increasing it, we're going to have a condition of approval that the board is, by matter of policy, has established for the last few years, that 25%. I would say then this board has seen the essential housing designation in the ag reserve, which includes baked into it the 25% requirement. So would it be good to have it? I would absolutely not want to discount it, but I wouldn't want you to think that we're not capturing the spirit and a lot of what we would want to get out of new development in these areas as well.
Okay, and then I'll just add, I do like allowing it for voluntary under 10 units. You had that in there. And then extending the rentals to, I don't see why we can't do 50 years and in perpetuity on county-owned land. I'm not sure about the 30 years on for sale. I'd like to hear more conversation on that. I go back and forth on that one. The annual income verification, we absolutely should be doing this. I would say, I think that we need to have some sort of a grace period for people who maybe have gotten a raise and, we don't want to just kick them out on the street, have some sort of leeway for them to find another place, because we do want people to earn more money, do well, and not be afraid that they're going to get kicked out of their home. So that should be considered. And then my last question was, 2 questions. Are there property tax exemptions on all of these units? Anything that's affordable or workforce is not paying property taxes, right? Or?
No, they're not exempt. The valuation is lower because the sales price is restricted.
So, on the rental units, I thought that the legislator, so was that just a discussion? They didn't do it?
These are pre that.
These are what?
Pre that.
Oh, well, I didn't know. They can change it. Okay.
I think that's
good to know.
live, work.
Live local.
That was a possible option, but we have not addressed that.
Okay.
That was what, 70 of the units, 70 of the units had to be workforce. So
Yeah.
a lot of these projects don't even come anywhere close to having 70 units.
Yeah. Okay, and then my last question was on the like for like. when you were talking about that? Is that just on for sale, or is that whatever the unit is, it's like for like?
Again, that would be a policy decision, but typically where it's used is to ensure that you're getting single-family for sale units, because those are the ones least likely to be delivered in the system.
Thank you. Commissioner Bernard.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Mayor. Let me make sure. On, going back to the slide on page 36, 37, I know for me, I still want us to, there are a lot of these issues that it's very hard for me to weigh in since we have not really had the chance to meet with our business community groups, such as Gold Coast Builders, the Economic Council, small builders, large builders. So, but there are a couple things that I'd like to weigh in on in regards to on the applicability. I know for me that I cannot support extending the for sale units for 30 years because I just believe that we need to provide economic mobility, and 15 years, I think that's pretty good versus a 30-year period. On the dispositions options, I'd love to hear from the business group, so that way we can kind of like have a discussion on what's the best way. And on the pricing schedule, I'd love to see us to take a look at the different, separating the pricings on the for sale piece. So in that way, that would potentially give us some more single family units and changing it from, let's say, townhomes so in that way we can get more units. And I'd love for us to explore on the development process and regulations. There are a couple of things that you've mentioned I'd love for us to take a look at. And I do support the reduced parking requirements. And then the impact fee assistance, I'd love to also take a look at reducing the affordability to that below 110% of the AMI. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Baxter.
Hi, thank you. I have a few questions before the recommendations, and forgive me, it's going to be a little bit scattered because I've been writing them down as everyone else has spoken. So a couple questions that I wanted to kind of expand upon. How much does our plan amendments, how much do they cost?
The county has
Roughly $10,000 for a flu amendment.
And roughly how much does a TDR cost?
anywhere from $78 to $57,000, but the real cost of the plan amendment is the use of an agent typically. That is the big expense associated with the plan amendment, and the time. Yes.
Right. That's just the application cost.
I mean, would a potential savings then, well, you're saying it would be the person, even if we decided to try to make it more affordable with looking at what that $10,000 is, and we decided not to charge for these specific type of projects, they still would have to pay the person up to, so that might not be the best, so thank you for answering that. The down payment assistance portion of what we were discussing, so is the idea of the reason if they sell it prior to the 15 years that we are getting, I guess, reimbursed for that money? What is the ultimate goal on the for sale units?
The goal is to keep the unit in that affordability price range. Selling it before the 15 years, you sell it to me. At year 13, the clock starts again. We want to keep it in affordability. If you hit 15 years in a day, it comes out of the program.
And then, so at 15-year mark, all the restrictions drop?
Correct. On a for sale product, yes.
And
Can I follow up?
Yeah.
But if they're getting if they're getting down payment assistance, that down payment assistance would be for 30 years. So these are people who are buying units. Am I correct? If they're getting
amortize that over
15 years.
Is it so on the workforce? So the loans are not for 15 years?
Yes, they are.
So they are for 15 years only?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
And so then after, thank you for that. So after that 15-year period, all the restrictions go away, but do they have that buyout option? So say there's an increase in their property value that much, can they opt to pay it back?
They own it.
Well, I'm saying like at 10 years, let's say, they haven't met that 15-year threshold, they want to sell it. Can they pay back whatever would be left in the down payment assistance to have it at market rate?
If they were selling the house at year 10, that would come out of proceeds to repay
Yes.
what's left is the balance of that as well as the balance of the mortgage in a typical house transaction.
And I guess I'm saying we allow for that.
Yes.
Or asking.
Yep.
I'm just-
But the unit would need to be sold at the restricted price to an eligible household.
That,
In
yeah,
that
they can't
income
take that
eligible
unit and
buyer.
then sell it at market rate.
Right.
15 years and one day, they're able to sell it at market rate. So when they walk in the door, they've got savings, they've got investments from day one. They just can't realize that full investment until 15 years and one day. They have that equity.
They have restricted equity when they start.
That is correct.
And it unrestricts, the equity unrestricts.
At 15 years.
May I speak? The equity unrestricts after 15 years. So they have a restricted equity in the form of the down payment assistance and whatever the differential is between the actual value of the house and what they bought it for. So let's say it's a $200,000 home. It's probably worth $450,000 on the day they move in. And they've got another $57,000, so-called 50 grand. So they're walking in at 500,000 they're going to get restricted, but once that equity gets restricted, they only get a portion of it back. But once they go to 15 years and one day, they get the whole thing. It's all theirs.
So
If I could
on
just
the,
add to that, I'm sorry. They do get some equity
Equity.
appreciation, though, because as that workforce housing sale price increases with incomes over time, there is some increase. It's just not as much as a full market rate increase under most economic scenarios.
so I guess to wrap this up on your affordability periods, I'm not at all in favor of going to 13 years or 30 years on for sale, excuse me. 15 years, okay. And honestly, I would like us to not, if somebody sells in year 14, I'd like to set the reoccurring years even less than 15. But, if your goal is to keep them in perpetuity or trying to keep, we have so many rentals. The thing is, how many for sale units do we actually have in this program currently?
About 250 for sale units have been constructed. We have a few more in the pipeline.
And are they currently so they're constructed, lived in, the program is happening currently?
Individuals in the homes.
And how long have we had this program in place?
Since 2006, but the for sale units did not materialize until, I think, 2017, 2018, the first for sale units.
I guess my point is I don't think there's some huge loss, but maybe some benefit and incentive to getting homeowners more involved. And we have hundreds, 1,100 to 1,400, whether that's bonds, we have other hundreds, rentals everywhere. Why not make, the American dream a little bit of more reality if we're only talking about a couple hundred units in the overall picture? That ratio, that scheme, that schematic is very skewed to one side, unless I'm misunderstanding the numbers of how many rentals versus ownership we're having.
Just a quick question.
And I would tell you that disparity exists because our units track based on what the market brings in, what you see on Thursdays. So there's nothing driven by us that will move apartments versus detached single-family townhouse, anything like that. This is just following what the market brings us.
And again, that market part of it is why I wanted to have more of industry kind of participating in these conversations. The idea of restricting in perpetuity on county-owned land, I am in favor of that. If we're going to, have county-owned land that is rentals, I'm assuming or are we talking about ownership? Rentals, right?
Could be either one.
So for rentals, I'm okay with restricting it in, perpetuity. If we want to say this is always going to be a rental or affordable unit, As far as 50 years for, extend to 50 years for new rental projects, I don't have a strong feeling on that one way or the other. I think 50 years from now is a very long time. So we'll leave that alone. Allowing projects with less than 10 units, I think, is reasonable to, to participate. There were, so I think we covered most of this. All right, so lastly, I cannot stress enough how many times as a board we have focused on infrastructure over the past, and roads and what's here and what's not. And I have to say that I am a little concerned that there's let me back up a little bit. One of the things that I had asked the attorney earlier was about, we have a density bonus program. And I wanted to know from legal, and he will get back to us, but I want the board to be aware of what I would like us to all know, is that could we make it as a part of our ordinance to get the density bonus in areas of deficient roads, to get the density bonuses, that it has to be of a standard. Now, not the development order, because we can't restrict that, but to get the bonus of all those additional units on roads that are already suffering. I mean, we have an issue here, and it's a balance, right? We have this huge housing issue, but we also have this huge infrastructure and road system issue. And we have to find a way to balance the two. So I don't know, if we get that legal opinion at some point, I would like to know. But the reason I mention that now is it brings me to my next point. I cannot express enough how much of a big no on changing the tier to also go into the ex-urban, rural, and ag tiers until we get our infrastructure. I think we're going to be having huge workshops, mobility fees, if this legislation passes, and we're already in the process of looking at an overall picture. But I think our infrastructure is struggling way too much currently to allow this to expand, especially ex-urban. I mean, we're specifically talking about the acreage, where I think every road out there almost is suffering and deficient. So how do you go then say, all right, well, we're going to add them to this? It's a huge problem, and I can promise you from hearing her at previous meetings that if the Mayor Sachs was here, she'd be probably a little antsy in her seat about having this in the anywhere in the ag reserve. So I'll leave that at that.
Commissioner Bernard?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Just two quick points. On the exchange that you talked about since 2019, is the reason why they're not using the exchange because, like, we as a board have been more to build the units on site a little bit more lately?
I would say it goes more to what Patrick mentioned earlier, that most of the projects that we're seeing are multifamily, and so that is the product that we're seeing. There aren't that many parcels left for single-family development. And so the likely candidates to use an exchange program and send their units off through the exchange program, we just don't have that many of them.
Okay. Thank you very much. And lastly, just to make sure that I know sometimes we have our 30-year notes. Don't we have those, when we do provide second mortgages to our residents?
We do have them on our purchase assistance and first mortgage program. We do have 30 years.
Now, are those workforce units or?
Affordable.
Those are all affordable?
Yeah.
So on the affordable units, they're 15 years?
On the affordable units for our purchase assistance or first mortgage program, it's 30 years.
Okay. And then
then some of the programs under that, some are 15, just depending on what the program is.
Okay, but none of the workforce units are 30 years?
No.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think I'll bring this one to a close with my questions, and then first I'd like to reiterate that we need reporting. I mean, we saw what happened in Wellington, where units were getting rented at market rate. So we definitely need to stay on top of reporting of the units. I do agree that there could be a grace period of what qualifies for being a, someone who is in an affordable housing unit or a workforce housing unit, and if they've achieved the American dream and they're getting a raise, I don't think we need to kick them out on the street the moment that happens. But I do see that we do need to monitor this. I do have a question, and to achieve the American dream, we all have to have a good credit report. So folks that are in apartment units, how do they establish credit? Is there a credit reporting system that apartment complexes or landlords or anything can contribute to? Do you have, that does not really pertain to anything we're talking about, but it does if you want to then go and purchase a unit. You have to have a good credit report. So I didn't know if there was anything out there like that. And if you don't have an answer, you can come back to me with one, that's fine.
Really don't. The only point I would make on it is through the rentals, so much of what we tried to do the program is stay out of the way of management, management groups. And what we heard going back through the years from entities who manage, we have, when someone comes in, they do the background check, they run a credit check, they're already doing these things for them. We had contemplated through the years requiring that ourselves and stepped away from it because the apartments are doing that, to your question about credit and things of that sort. So otherwise, that's the level of our involvement at that point, and we wouldn't engage on any others if they're deficient in their payments, things of that sort.
Okay, thank you. For the exchange, it would almost be that it should be bedroom for bedroom. So if you're building a five-bedroom home, you should be replacing that with at least 5 bedrooms, not obviously a 5-bedroom rental unit, but at least a conglomeration of units that have 5 bedrooms. Does that make sense? And that is more than the 1.5, but that truly does replace the amount of bedrooms. And the developers are already getting a bonus. So I know we're trying to figure out industry and everything like that, but at the end of the day, we're also trying to put people in units. So I would like to just maybe base it on the amount of bedrooms. I'd appreciate the possible changes that you all have listed here. The 15 and the 30, I'm fine with that. And the folks that are getting into the homes as owners are benefiting along the way. One, no or very little down payment. 2, very small interest rate. Because the house is at a discounted rate, the taxes are lower. So along the way, they're already saving money. So I'm fine with the 15-year, and then if they go out before 15, it kicks back into 15. I'm fine with that. I agree with the tier application. No. And I think since the day one that I took office, I've never been in favor of in lieu. I don't think it's a really good exchange, and it doesn't put units in the ground. So I do not see I see eliminating the in lieu option. I know we would like units to be on site, and with the apartments, it makes it a whole lot easier to do them on site than the homes, but we don't have that many projects that are coming to us that are building homes. So wherever they can build them, we need to make sure that they get built. Reduced parking requirements, we got to figure that one out. And we also have to, jumping off of what Commissioner Baxter said, your light is on again and your light is on again. I'm ending this conversation. I'm not having more questions after this. So, Commissioner Baxter, what is it that you'd like to ask?
I just wanted to kind of agree. I don't like the in lieu. I agree with bedrooms for bedrooms, because I didn't mention that earlier. The parking, I hesitate on that, but if you think it's a good, if Commissioner Weiss thinks that's a good idea, I will support his thoughts on that. Matt, I would like us to have at the county a map of units, color-coded, for sale, rentals, already online, not online, so that we can have kind of that bird's eye view, what we're talking about, where we're talking about, and be informed on where they are. We like information. So, and I don't know if it would take longer. I think a paper one for now is fine, but even if we could have that digital, to have, something to hover over that says this many units or whatnot, because I think we have a large county and it can get lost on a paper, but for now, I think that would be beneficial. And so the map of the units, and if you could, at the end of all of our questions, just kind of recap what you've taken away so we know we're all on the same page, I would appreciate it.
And Commissioner Baxter, if I could interject, we are looking at launching the Workforce Affordable Housing Dashboard later this week. It's ready to go, and one of the things you're going to be able to do is you can either click on the affordable units or the workforce units. You'll be able to hover over the map to see what the development is, where it is, and all of those types of things, so that will be helpful, hopefully, for you all.
I love when you're already doing something I've asked for. It's like my favorite thing, so thank you.
Administrator Baker.
Lucky.
When the board is done, I just wanted to follow up on parking. We are going to be looking at that and studying it. I am aware of developments where parking was significantly reduced, and the individuals living in those particular developments, tow trucks are there, and they're the least able to afford to pay for towing. So we just want to avoid creating that atmosphere, but definitely reducing parking where we can possibly reduce it.
Commissioner Weiss.
Thank you. I just want to go over my list real quick before we end this. I'm fine to support allowing units under 10 units to participate. That's no problem there. I agree with the income verification and eligibility determination. The only question I had about that is, so if somebody gets married or brings a roommate into their house, into their unit, that has no impact?
The property managers in those circumstances, when the household gets larger or smaller, do typically recertify.
Oh, okay. So those people have to recertify. Okay. So they're used to doing it. Shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, all the recertification is at the discretion of the property manager, and typically they will do it when the
I think it needs to be done annually. And then maybe you give them, a 6-month, 9-month grace period to give them time to relocate. I also, on the pricing schedule, I think we really just send you guys back to include the lower bracket of the 40 to 60%, because those prices are very high. And I have no issue with the 15 years on the for sale. I think on the rental should be 50, at least, but 50 is good. And I think we need to look at everything we can to how we can reduce costs on building, the workforce or affordable units. So I think that needs to be on the table.
Thank you. Commissioner Woodward.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I wanted to weigh in on just a couple that I forgot. I do agree on removing the in lieu option, and also on keeping it at or below 110% that you had asked. And I just wanted to also, your slide 14, I believe that's the tier of where all of this is allowed, right? And I just wanted to also point out, if I'm looking at this correctly, it's a little small here, all of the grayed out area of this is municipalities, right?
Right, yes.
So it's just the white areas that are unincorporated within this tier. How many parcels are we actually talking about here that are left to be considered as part of this whole process?
Not many, but there is a great deal of potential for redevelopment. And I should mention that through the workforce housing program, as I mentioned earlier, we have units that have been delivered in Lake Worth Beach. The workforce units can be delivered in municipalities. So the projects there are not subject to our workforce housing requirements, but our units may land there.
So we can put the workforce units there, but the density that this is discussing is on unincorporated lands. And if it's redevelopment, does it have, for them to redevelop it, would they be asking for an increase in density of what already exists there to participate in this? Or if they're going to redevelop it and the same 100 units get built, that's not part of this, right?
Yeah, typically, there is an interest in increasing density, and often substantially. Yeah,
Is that usually multifamily, or is any of that going to be single family?
typically multifamily.
So that's what we need to be considering when we're talking about this. We're most likely going to be dealing with multifamily redevelopment and unincorporated. If we stay in the same tier, I know it's a hot button to talk about expanding this, but we did a pretty good job when we did the ag reserve as far as putting prohibitions. I know there are people out there who say it's a death by 1,000 cuts and it wasn't great, but we still have a considerable amount of preserved land in there. As if we're going to extend it, then we'd have to put the same type of due diligence into expanding this into those areas that was done in the ag reserve, making preserve requirements, green space, whatever, all of that. But what we're talking, we're running low on parcels here, and if it's all going to be redevelopment, we're only going to be talking multifamily for the most part. And if single family is the desire for this board, that is going to require expansion. Just food for thought. I'm not asking for it today, but that is something that has to be considered if we want single family homes. Go ahead.
Just one thing to add to that point, Commissioner, one thing to consider, and through the years, the boards have seen a couple projects that have this. It could be a multifamily site, but they can also contain townhouse on it, on boundaries and pieces like that, that can be sold, whether it's in a condo form or a fee simple. So it doesn't entirely preclude for sale product, and I get it, that's a little bit more difficult, which is why you don't see it very often, but that can be done. So that's something board can discuss as we're moving forward, certainly as we move into the discussions the next couple of months. Just food for thought to give back to you.
Thank you. I do see the impact fee assistance being at 110, not 140. I know we keep talking about the 140 threshold, but it's the lower thresholds that need more help. So I would say 110. I think you've gotten a lot of direction from us, and I think the next thing for you to do is take our direction, meet with industry, bring it back to us. And as Commissioner Baxter said, why don't you do a little overview of what all of the things that we have given you. You can send that to us individually. We don't need to workshop that. But I think what we do need is an opportunity in the future where we are talking about the options with industry in the room so that everybody has input, but not wait till the last minute because.
And Vice Mayor Marine, I'm
yes.
sorry.
No, go right ahead.
I just wanted, the impact fee is a little bit of a different animal. There doesn't have to be a comp plan amendment or anything like that. So moving forward, we can have direction with respect to that. I think I heard a few of you wanted to move forward just for direction for our department if we.
I think the direction would be at 110.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And seriously? Commissioner Baxter.
Just to clarify, because I know we are talking about potentially looking at extending this into other tiers, and I think the only time we can talk about this is up here. When we're talking about bonus densities, are we not talking about mostly it's multiple units being built and in some form of like a PUD?
Yes,
A planned unit, right, development?
could be.
But the tiers listed, I mean, are 1+ acre up to 1 unit per 10 acres and up. So I guess also the thought in this is that we also want to have a thoughtful comp plan that says, we're not mixing apartments with houses on 1+ acres.
And you've recently approved the Lake Haven development to be, that actually has single-family residential, what is it, LR2? And then they have a townhouse community. It's at the front of the community, and that was just recently approved. There's other opportunities.
Which one are you talking about?
Lake Haven on Southern Boulevard.
Well, yeah, on Southern is different than
But then there's
going
other-
into a tier, into an area.
And I think what we're talking about extending it to the tier is making it mandatory, whereas right now, if a comp plan amendment comes through, we make the suggestion, the board decides whether they want to impose it on the development or not, however it's imposed, whether it's on-site, off-site. We did that with Trotting Center, Verdera, we did that with those two projects, and I think those ended up being off-site, but those are the types of projects that we're talking about. Would it be mandatory that they would require, that those would be required to be, attached to that project or a requirement?
Yeah, again, I mean, aside from it not matching the surrounding densities, I really just, the infrastructure needs to be there first.
And we can discuss that.
Commissioner Woodward.
Thank you. I did want to clarify that, because we do approve, we have, and boards before us have approved projects in this area, and it's not been mandatory. Whatever has been put on there was a choice of that board. And I'm just saying, if they're going to keep wanting to build there, then why not make some of this mandatory? I mean, if some of these developments, Arden, that's out there right now, have been built under this exact same ordinance of what we're talking about now, how many additional units would we have some other place, even if they did an exchange? If they're going to build and they're coming, they're going to show up here either way to come and build. If they bought land, they want to build there, why shouldn't we get some workforce units out of this and affordable units that's mandatory, and put all the parameters you want on it, but don't leave it up into, whatever they present us with and come and meet with us and then the board decides. They should be playing by the same rules as everybody else. That's my opinion.
Commissioner Baxter.
I mean, I'll leave it be. I think we're kind of beating this to death at this point. I absolutely, I mean, my residents, a lot of the acreage residents, didn't want Westlake to be there, and now we're suffering through a lot of issues because they're there. It's a clash of lifestyles because they live one way and the surrounding neighbors live another way, which is where we are. And so I don't want this repeat effect throughout the entire area is, I guess, the concern. So I am here to stand up for, my residents, and I think they would hate that. So that is what we are here for, is to stand up for our residents, and, if this impacts that area. So thank you.
Okay, going once, going twice. But I do want to make a comment, though, about, and Patrick, you alluded to it also, townhomes. Townhomes are fee simple. So I know when we talk about multifamily, sometimes townhomes get thrown in with multifamily, but I've lived in a townhome for 30 years and I had absolutely no issue with it. I had a front yard, a backyard, and we had amenities on site. So anything we can do for townhomes is, and I know we've done that in the Ag Reserve. We approved a project that was townhomes, which was the first that hasn't come out of the ground yet, but it'll get there eventually. But I think you all have good direction from the board. I think this has been a lively, spirited discussion, and I appreciate everybody taking the time to do this. And you all are done, and I have here BCC comments, and anybody else who'd like to comment on anything. So if you do, put your light on. If you don't worry. Commissioner Weiss.
I just, two things. One is I need to, I'll look up at the camera, I congratulate my aide and assistant, Virginia Savietto, who is going to be serving on Palm Beach County School Board, so congratulations, Virginia. And I don't want to take away the thunder of my colleague, Mac Bernard, but I do want to just make a comment regarding Juneteenth, which is tomorrow, and really the celebration of emancipation 2 years after Abraham Lincoln announced the emancipation of enslaved people in this country. But it's hopefully an opportunity to reflect, number one, on how we have progressed, but also that we still have challenges as families, as communities, as everybody does. But I am hopeful by taking time to recognize contributions of the African American people in this country, that we realize how important everybody is in making America really a wonderful nation. So, thank you.
Commissioner Woodward, any comments? Commissioner Barnett? Commissioner Bernard? Commissioner Baxter?
I think I said enough. Thank you.
I think it was a lively discussion, and I think we're adjourned at 3:35. Thank you very much.